Working with death takes a cold heart, but not everyone makes it through what happens when the lights go out. In these morgue horror stories, you'll hear real accounts from people who saw and heard things that were never supposed to be there. Like in the story you're about to hear, where a lone assistant at the Boston morgue discovers that some bodies just don't want to rest, and one of them still had something to say. But before we jump into the story, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any terrifying tales, and let me know in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I always thought the silence of a morgue at night was the scariest thing in the world, until that day. It was October 17th, and the air was already heavy, as if something was about to happen. I had been working as the medical examiner's assistant at the Boston morgue for 3 years, and no night shift had ever left me as tense as that one. The place was a maze of white tiles and fluorescent lights that always hummed softly, like a persistent insect. The walls held the smell of disinfectant and something else, something you could never really clean. I was alone, as always, finishing up the paperwork on the latest case. A middle-aged man found lifeless in his apartment. Routine stuff. Or at least it should have been. That's when the lights started flickering. It wasn't a blackout, not an electrical issue. It was as if someone was playing with the switch, fast and deliberate. I looked up expecting to see a maintenance technician, but there was no one there. Just me and the bodies. And then came the cold. It wasn't a normal chill, it was a sudden drop in temperature, as if the air had turned to ice in seconds. I rubbed my arms, feeling the hairs stand on end. Damn, the thermostat must be acting up, I thought, trying to convince myself. But when I looked at the thermometer on the wall, the needle was steady at normal, 16 degrees. Yet I could see my breath coming out in short puffs, as if I were in the middle of winter. And that's when I heard it. Footsteps. Clear, distant, but unmistakable. Someone walking down the main corridor, but I knew there was no one there. The security guard had gone to do his external rounds, and Dr. Calloway had left hours ago. I froze, listening to the echo of those footsteps getting closer, as if whoever was there knew exactly where I was. "Is someone there?" My voice came out weaker than I intended. Nothing answered. The footsteps stopped. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Must be the building settling or a big rat. But deep down, I knew rats didn't wear shoes. That's when the sheet covering the body on the table next to me moved. It wasn't the wind, not a tremor. It was a firm tug, as if someone had grabbed the edge and pulled it sharply. The fabric slid, revealing the corpse's foot. Pale, cold, but wrong. The skin didn't have that grayish tone I was used to seeing. It looked almost alive. I stepped back, feeling a lump in my throat. This isn't right. And then, as if the universe wanted to prove me right, all the steel drawers in the morgue started rattling at the same time. That metallic, high-pitched noise filled the room, as if something was trying to get out of them. I looked around, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear the whisper. "Not yet." The voice came from behind my neck, so close I could feel the cold breath on my skin. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just stood there, paralyzed, as the silence swallowed the room again. And it was only when the clock struck midnight that I realized the body on the table had no rigor mortis, and it hadn't arrived that night. It had died that night. I couldn't take my eyes off the body on the table. The skin still had a rosy hue, the muscles flexible, as if death had come minutes, not hours ago. But the report said he had been found that morning. It was impossible, unless... A shiver ran down my spine. The air was still cold, but now I felt something more. A heavy energy, as if the morgue itself was holding its breath. The lights had stopped flickering, but the darkness in the corners of the room seemed denser, almost alive. I should have run, should have screamed, called security, anything. But all I could do was stare at that body, as if it was going to tell me what the hell was happening. And then, its hand moved. It wasn't a spasm, not a post-mortem reflex. It was a slow, deliberate movement, the fingers contracting as if trying to grab something. I swallowed hard, my muscles locked. This isn't real. This can't be real. But it was. And worse, I wasn't alone. That feeling of being watched came back, stronger now. Someone or something was there in the room with me. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, but I felt it. Like a weight in the air, a pressure on the back of my neck. And then came the noise. Something scraped on the floor, dragging slowly, coming from the direction of the steel drawers. I turned sharply, expecting to see… what? A rat? An intruder? But there was nothing there. Just the drawers, all closed except one. The last one in the row, which was slightly ajar, as if someone had forgotten to close it. I knew I hadn't left it like that. I took a deep breath and took a step toward the drawer. Every movement I made echoed in the silence, and I swore the bodies around me were watching. When I reached out to push the drawer shut, the metal was ice cold, so cold it almost stuck to my skin. And then I heard it again. Not yet. This time the voice came from inside the drawer. I jumped back, nearly tripping over the body that, now I noticed, was sitting on the table, its head tilted to the side, eyes open. Eyes that weren't glazed over, weren't lifeless. They were fixed on me. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I didn't know if I should run, scream, or just pass out. But before I could do anything, all the lights in the morgue went out at once. The darkness was absolute, and in the pitch black, something touched my shoulder. I didn't scream. I couldn't. Fear had paralyzed me, and all I could do was stand there, feeling that hand, if it was a hand, slowly moving down my arm as if examining me. And then a whisper, so close it seemed to come from inside my own head. "You're going to help me come back." The lights flickered back on in an instant. The room was empty. The body was lying down again, covered by the sheet. The drawers, all closed. But I knew something had changed. And worse, I knew it wasn't over. I don't remember how I got out of there. All I know is that when I came to, I was in my car, my hands shaking on the steering wheel and sweat pouring down my forehead. The clock read 3 a.m. The morgue was behind me, lit only by the moon, as if nothing wrong had happened inside. But I knew. Something was wrong with that body. Something was wrong with that place. I spent the rest of the night awake, trying to convince myself it had been a hallucination, a result of exhaustion. But when the sun rose, I still felt that cold deep in my veins, that fear. I returned to the morgue the next morning, my stomach in knots. I needed to see the body again to confirm if I had imagined it all. But when I arrived, Dr. Calloway was already there, standing next to the autopsy table, his expression tense. "Did you touch the corpse from case 17B?" he asked without greeting me. I swallowed hard. "No. Why?" He just looked at me, as if I were lying, and then pulled back the sheet. The body was gone. There was only one thing on the table, a dark, wet stain, with the smell of burnt flesh, and in the middle of it a message scratched with a fingernail, as if someone had clawed at the metal. "Now!" The air rushed out of my lungs, and then the lights started flickering again. This time, I didn't wait. I turned and ran. I bolted down the corridor, ignored the security guard calling me, didn't stop even when the morgue gate creaked behind me, as if something was trying to pull me back. I got into the car and started the engine with a jolt. It was only when I was 3 blocks away that I realized my right hand was cold, ice cold, as if something was still holding it. I looked in the rearview mirror, and for a second, just a second, I saw someone sitting in the back seat. A middle-aged man, with open eyes, smiling. I never went back to the morgue, not the next day, not ever. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still hear the footsteps and the whisper, "Not yet." And I know that sooner or later, they'll find me again. That was intense. What did you think of the story? On a scale from 0 to 10, what would you rate it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Working at a morgue is already creepy on its own, but when things start moving on their own, there's no way to walk out of there unchanged. And sometimes, it's not what you see that sticks with you. It's what you find inside a body. Like in the story you're about to hear, where the real horror is buried, way deeper than it should be. The first corpse I prepared alone in the St. Vincent Hospital morgue looked at me. No, it wasn't a hallucination. I swear, When I handled old Jeremiah's body, a homeless man who died of hypothermia, his eyes, which I had closed just minutes before, were open again. And it wasn't that muscle-relaxing thing, no. They turned in my direction slowly, as if someone were behind that cold skin pulling strings. I almost screamed, but I took a deep breath and forced his eyelids down again. It's all in my head, I thought. After all, it was my first month as a mortuary assistant in that place, an old building in New Orleans that smelled of disinfectant and mold. The morgue was in the basement, and everyone in the hospital knew those walls had stories, especially from the time of Hurricane Katrina, when bodies piled up for weeks without power, and the living heard things in the dark corridors. But I didn't believe in that nonsense, at least not until that night. I was finishing up the report when I heard the first whisper. It came from the cold room where the bodies were stored. A low, chilling sound, as if someone were breathing right into my ear. I froze. Ventilation, I convinced myself, even though I knew the air system in that place was older than my grandmother. I went to the door and looked inside. The fluorescent lights flickered, illuminating the steel drawers where the bodies rested. Nothing, just the low hum of the freezers. That's when I heard it again. This time it wasn't just a sigh, it was words. Someone or something was saying my name. Daniel. The voice was hoarse, wet, as if it had come from a lung full of water. My heart raced so much I could almost feel it in my neck. "Who's there?" I shouted, holding a necropsy scissor as if it were a weapon. Silence. Then the lights flickered again, and I saw. At the back of the room, near drawer 13, the one that always jammed, a thin mist formed in the air. It wasn't vapor, not smoke. It was a shape, something like a shadow, but with outlines that resembled a face. And the eyes. God, the eyes were two dark holes, but I knew they were staring at me. I didn't think twice. I ran out, almost slipping on the waxed floor, and returned to my room. My hands were shaking so much I could barely grab my digital recorder, the one I used for notes during procedures. If I record, I'll prove I'm not crazy, I thought, trying to convince myself. I went back to the cold room door and pressed record. In the first few seconds, there was only the noise of the freezers. But then... "Help!" The voice came through clearly on the recorder. And it wasn't just one. There were many. Overlapping whispers, moans, words I couldn't understand, until suddenly a whole sentence came out of nowhere. So clear it was as if someone had spoken directly into my ear. "No one remembers us." And then everything happened at once. The temperature plummeted. A freezer-like cold enveloped me so strong that my breath turned to mist in the air. The drawer doors began to rattle, all of them, as if something was pounding from inside, trying to get out. And the mist. The damned mist grew, taking over the room. This time it wasn't just one shape. There were many. Translucent silhouettes, some in hospital gowns, others in drenched rags, as if they had died drowned. The one closest to me stretched out a hand. It didn't have fingers, just something like smoke tentacles, but I felt it when it touched my face. It was like diving into the sea in winter, an ice that burned my skin and made me scream. I stepped back, tripped, and the recorder fell to the floor. When I stood up, the room was quiet again. The lights had stopped flickering, the drawers weren't moving. Only the recorder was still on, and on it, at that exact second, a different voice from the others spoke, clear as a bell. "Tell our story." I didn't wait to hear the rest. I ran, took the stairs two at a time, and didn't stop until I reached the parking lot. But one thing I knew, that wasn't going to be my last night in the morgue. Because now, the dead knew my name. I didn't want to go back to that morgue. But something pulled me back the next night. Maybe it was the recorder, still there on the cold room floor with that ghostly voice trapped inside. Maybe it was guilt, because I had left the bodies locked in there, with them. Or maybe it was just because I needed to know. The hospital was quieter than usual when I entered the basement. Even the noise from the freezers seemed muffled, as if the air were heavier. I took a deep breath and opened the cold room door. The recorder was still where I had left it. The screen was flashing, indicating the recording hadn't stopped. It had lasted all night. My hands were sweating as I picked up the device. I knew I should delete it, leave, and never come back. But instead, I pressed play. The first few seconds were just static. Then the whispers started again, stronger now, as if they had noticed I was listening. Water rising. No one came. It hurts. Still hurts. And then, a voice I recognized. It was old Jeremiah's, the corpse that had looked at me. They forgot us, Daniel, but you won't forget. The air turned icy again. This time I wasn't alone. They were all there. Pale figures, some tattered, others swollen as if they had spent weeks in the water. Ghosts of Katrina. People who died forgotten in that morgue when the hurricane flooded the city. The one closest to me was a woman with her dress clinging to her body, black water dripping from her hair. She stretched out her hand, not to touch me but to point at drawer 13. That damn drawer that always jammed. I knew what she wanted. My legs were trembling as I approached. The handle was too cold, almost sticking to my skin. When I pulled, the metal creaked, but it opened. Inside, there wasn't a body. There were many pieces of clothes, wet photos, a soaked diary, things that should have been buried with the dead but were trapped there, forgotten. And in the middle of it all, a small wooden cross with names scratched with a knife. "This is what's left of us," the woman's voice whispered. "Our stories." I understood then. They weren't haunting the morgue out of malice. They just wanted to be remembered. I took the cross with my trembling hand. At that instant, a cold wind swept through the room and the lights went out. In the dark, I felt hands, dozens of them, touching me, not with violence but with immense weight, as if each ghostly finger carried a whole lifetime of pain. "Tell," the voices whispered together, "so we can rest." When the lights came back on, I was alone. The cross was still in my hand. I left the morgue that night and never returned. But it wasn't out of fear, it was because I had work to do. I researched every name on that cross, found families, stories, people who disappeared in Katrina and were never properly buried. I told everything, in a blog, in a book, even in interviews. And whenever someone asked me why I did it, I only answered one thing: because the dead don't deserve to be forgotten. Sometimes in the dead of night, when the silence is absolute, I still hear the whispers. But now they only say one word: thank you. Creepy, right? Some horrors are so visceral it's hard to believe they actually happened. But even when everything seems calm, the unexplainable can be lurking in the shadows, just waiting to show itself. And the story you're about to hear shows what happens when contact with the dead goes beyond the body and reaches the soul. I've been working with death for over 15 years, but nothing prepared me for what happened that night at the funeral home. The place was already eerie by nature, you know. Silent corridors, that smell of wilted flowers mixed with disinfectant, and a fluorescent light that always flickered, as if it were tired of illuminating so much suffering. But that Tuesday, the air was different, heavier, as if something was lingering there, waiting. My name is Martha, and I'm the one responsible for preparing the bodies for their final farewell. I've seen it all: accidents, illnesses, old age. But the man who arrived that night was different. Lorenzo, my colleague, brought the body from the cold chamber with a tense expression. "This one's strange, Martha," he whispered, as if the dead man could hear. When I pulled back the sheet, my stomach twisted. The man was young, maybe in his early 30s, but his face looked like he had seen something horrible before he died. His eyes were slightly open, his mouth ajar, and his skin had a grayish tone that wasn't normal, not even for a corpse. And the weirdest part? There wasn't a single visible wound. Nothing that explained how he had passed away. I decided to start the work, but from the first touch something was wrong. His skin was cold, of course, but it was a cold that burned, as if I were touching dry ice. And then came the feeling, that impression that someone was there breathing behind my neck. I looked back quickly, but there was no one there, just Lorenzo, who also seemed uncomfortable. "Did you feel that?" he asked, rubbing his arms. I didn't even need to answer. We knew. That's when it happened. I was cleaning the man's face when His mouth moved. It wasn't a spasm, not a reflex. It was deliberate, as if he were trying to say something. I took a step back, my heart beating so hard I could almost hear it. Lorenzo looked at me, pale. "You saw that, right?" He saw it too, and then the corpse's eyes began to tear up. Clear, slow tears, running down his temples and wetting the stretcher. My whole body trembled. I had heard stories of bodies releasing air or making noises, but crying, that was new, and worse. I felt something overwhelming, a sadness so deep it seemed to come from him, as if I were feeling the last desperate breath of that soul. Without thinking, I reached out and touched his face, trying to, I don't know, comfort. That's when his fingers closed around my wrist. Firmly. I screamed, pulled hard, but his hand wouldn't let go. Lorenzo ran to help me, and only then did the corpse open his fingers, slowly, as if saying goodbye. We finished the work in silence without looking at each other. I didn't even need to tell Lorenzo that this body wasn't going to the wake without me taking one last look. When I left the funeral home, the night was darker than usual, and the wind blew in whispers. But the worst was yet to come. I got home with my head throbbing. My husband, Carlos, was on the couch watching TV, but he turned it off as soon as he saw me come in. "Martha, you're as white as a sheet," he said, standing up quickly. I just mumbled that it had been a tough day and went straight to the kitchen to get a glass of water. My hands were still shaking. That's when I heard Carlos scream. I ran to the living room, and he was standing by the window, eyes wide. "There was a man there at our door," he said, his voice hoarse. "He just kept staring at me, Martha, and then he vanished." My blood ran cold. "What did he look like?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Carlos described the man. Young, dark hair, pale face, exactly like the corpse at the funeral home. I couldn't sleep that night. Every noise in the house made me jump. The wind banged the branches against the window, and I swore I heard footsteps in the hallway. Until, around 3 a.m., the phone rang. It was Lorenzo, his voice almost a whisper. "Martha, you need to come back here, now." When I arrived, the funeral home was in darkness, with only a faint light coming from the preparation room. Lorenzo was there, leaning against the wall, his face sweaty. He pointed to the stretcher. The man's body was gone. "I left him here, I swear to God. I just went to the bathroom, and when I came back..." He didn't need to finish. We searched the entire funeral home. Nothing. Until I heard a noise coming from the chapel where the wakes take place. The door was ajar, and inside, sitting on the first pew, was him, the corpse. With his back to us, motionless. Lorenzo almost fainted. I somehow managed to take a step forward. "Who are you?" My voice came out trembling. That's when he turned around. His eyes were filled with tears again, but now I saw something more. A glow. A pain that wasn't of this world. And then he spoke. His voice didn't come from his mouth, it came from everywhere. A whisper that echoed in the walls, the ceiling, inside my head. "They killed me." I fell to my knees. Lorenzo screamed. And at that instant, all the lights in the funeral home exploded, glass breaking, sparks flying, and in the midst of the chaos, the man's body disappeared, this time for good. The next day, the police found a violated tomb in the city cemetery. A man had been buried there a week ago, but the coffin was empty. And when they showed me his photo, it was our corpse. The case was never solved. Officially, they say it was body snatching, but I know the truth. That man came back for a reason. And after that night, I could never touch a corpse again without feeling that they are watching me. How bizarre was that? Sometimes all it takes is a cold touch or an empty stare to shake everything we thought we knew about death. But what happens when the dead try to send a message? That's what you'll find out now, in a story where the silence of the morgue hides a dangerous secret, one that's a little too alive to be ignored. But before we move on to the story, if you've made it this far, that means you're enjoying our stories. So hit that like button to let YouTube know you're into this kind of content, and never miss another horror story. The security alert in the morgue went off at the exact moment I was closing the report on the last autopsy. A sharp, insistent sound, as if something, or someone, was trying to get my attention. I looked at the monitor in my office, that glass cubicle reflecting the gray sky of Portland, and saw the message flashing in red. Unauthorized access, drawer 7. Strange. I was the only forensic technician on duty that night, and the morgue had been empty since Dr. Calloway left 2 hours earlier. Drawer 7. That was the one with the John Doe who arrived today, found in Forest Park, lying on a bench as if he were just sleeping. Nothing on the body indicated violence, just a rusty pocket watch in the coat pocket, marking 3:17. I went down to the cold chamber, the icy air clinging to my skin as the automatic doors opened. The silence was so heavy I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. The metal drawers, all closed, seemed normal. I approached drawer 7, placed my hand on the digital identifier. Locked. Nothing open, nothing out of place. System glitch, I murmured, relieved. But as I turned to leave, the alert went off again. Unauthorized access, drawer 7. This time my heart raced. I looked at the clock on the wall, 3:17. It wasn't possible. I returned to drawer 7, and now, yes, it was open. Just a few inches, enough for me to see the edge of the white sheet covering the body. My pulse tingled, as if something were warning me not to get close. But I've been working with the dead for 6 years. Corpses don't scare me. I pulled the drawer completely open. The sheet was stained with dirt, as if the body had turned by itself. And worse, John Doe's hands, previously crossed over his chest, were now at his sides, the fingers twisted, as if they had tried to grab something. The mouth, which had been closed, was now slightly open, letting out a trickle of dark liquid. What the hell? I muttered, instinctively stepping back. That's when I felt it. A cold breath passed through the back of my neck, so close it made every hair on my arm stand on end. And then, a whisper. Remember me. It wasn't a voice in my ear. It was inside my head, as if someone had shoved the words directly into my thoughts. I almost fell backward when the body in the drawer moved its head, slowly turning in my direction. The eyes, previously closed, were now open, glazed, opaque, but staring at me. I don't remember running. I just remember slamming the cold chamber door behind me, my heart beating so hard it hurt. In my ear, the echo of that voice still whispered, as if it had stuck to my skin. And in the pocket of my lab coat, without me noticing, John Doe's pocket watch, which I would swear I had left on the evidence table, was now with me. And when I looked at it, the hands frozen at 3:17, one thing became clear. This wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. I didn't tell anyone what happened that night. Who would believe me? A whispering corpse, a pocket watch that appeared out of nowhere in my pocket. I would sound crazy. But when Dr. Calloway arrived the next morning and announced he would perform John Doe's autopsy, I knew I couldn't run away. The autopsy room was colder than usual, even with all the lights on. John Doe's body was stretched out on the table, the sheet removed, exposing the pale skin already starting to turn gray. The smell of formaldehyde and disinfectant couldn't mask another odor, sweet and rotten, like spoiled fruit. Strange, Dr. Calloway murmured, passing the scalpel. No signs of external trauma, but the organs are melted. I approached, trying to ignore the chill on my spine. The heart, the liver, the lungs, everything seemed to have been consumed from within, as if something had corroded the body from the inside. And then, when Calloway opened the stomach, a worse smell took over the room. A thick black liquid oozed out, sticky, almost alive. Jesus, Calloway recoiled, covering his nose. This isn't natural. That's when the pocket watch in my pocket started to vibrate. I almost screamed. I took it out of my lab coat with a trembling hand, and the hands, previously stopped, now spun wildly, as if trying to escape the dial. And then, they stopped. 3:17 again. At the same instant, the lights flickered. Once, twice. On the third flicker, they went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. Only the sound of our panting breath and something else. a dragging coming from the autopsy table. "Calloway?" My voice came out in a hoarse whisper. Nothing. And then a touch on the back of my neck. Cold, sticky, like the fingers of someone who had spent hours in the water. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just the darkness. And the smell. That sweet and rotten smell, now so strong it burned my throat. "You promised to remember." The voice came from all directions at once, coming from the walls, the floor, from inside my head. And then, the lights came back on. John Doe's body was no longer on the table. He was standing in the corner of the room, his skin now dark, twisted as if it were burning from within. The eyes, previously opaque, now glowed with a faint, yellowish light. And the mouth opened slowly, releasing a trickle of that black substance. "They killed me," the voice came from that throat that shouldn't have worked. But I came back. Calloway was pressed against the wall, as white as the lab coat, his eyes wide with terror. I couldn't move. John Doe raised his hand, pointing to the pocket watch I was still holding. "Look inside." My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the pocket watch. With a click, the lid opened by itself. Inside there were no mechanisms, just a small memory chip glued to the bottom. "They know you've seen," John Doe whispered. "They're coming for you now." The lights flickered again, and when they came back on, the body was back on the table, motionless, as if nothing had happened. Only the smell and the chip in my hand proved it wasn't a delusion. Calloway looked at me, his face still pale. "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer, because in the corridor someone started banging on the morgue doors. One knock, two, and then the sound of a lock being forced open. The chip weighed in my hand like a deadly secret, and I knew they had come to get me, and this time they weren't going to leave any witnesses. Creepy, right? What did you think of the story? On a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rate it? Let me know in the comments. The smell of disinfectant mixed with something heavier, deeper, was always the first thing that hit me when I walked into that place. The morgue wasn't just cold because of the air conditioning cranked up to the max. It was that feeling that something, or someone, was always watching you, even when the rooms were empty. And that night I knew it wouldn't be any different. I had worked there for years, performing autopsies, filling out reports, organizing bodies. I had never been afraid, at least not in the way people imagine. Afraid of the dark, of shadows? No. But there were nights when the silence was so thick, it seemed like the air itself stopped circulating. And at those times, any noise, a creak, a distant click, made my heart race. That night I was alone, as always. Well, almost alone. Charles, the security guard, stayed at the front desk, but he never ventured too far inside. He said the place had a heavy energy, that it gave him the chills. I always laughed, of course, until that day. The body arrived around 11 at night. A girl, 18 years old, a car accident. When I unzipped the body bag, my stomach twisted. She was young, beautiful, her face still intact, as if she were sleeping. But the injuries on her body told another story. Something violent, quick. That kind of case always got to me, but this time it was different. I felt a tightness in my chest, a sadness that wasn't just professional. I followed the standard procedure, but my hand trembled a little. The sound of the scalpel against the dead skin echoed in the room, and I swore that every now and then I heard a whisper. Not words, just something. I took a deep breath, composing myself. It's fatigue, I thought. Working the night shift plays tricks on your mind. When I finished, I washed my hands with ice-cold water, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. I went to the front desk where Charles was, as always, watching a soccer game on his phone. He looked up and must have seen my face because he asked right away, "You're as white as a sheet, Doc. What's wrong?" Nothing. Just that new body. Young girl, you know, it weighs on you." Charles gave me that look of his, the one of someone who had seen plenty of strange things. "Yeah, I've had some good scares here. Once I swore I saw a shadow passing in the hallway. Crazy stuff, huh?" He laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was nervous, that's when we heard it. A loud, dry noise coming from the autopsy room, as if something heavy had fallen to the floor. Charles and I looked at each other, and I saw the blood drain from his face. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. "Let's go see," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The fluorescent light was flickering when we entered the room. And there she was, the girl, on the floor. The body had fallen from the stretcher. "But how?" Charles said, his voice trembling. "We left her there, strapped in, didn't we?" I was sure we had. We always strapped the bodies in precisely to avoid this. But the strap was loose, as if someone had undone it. We stood there looking at that body on the floor, and then Charles took a step back, his eyes wide. "Doc, what is it?" He pointed to the large mirror on the wall. She was looking at us. I turned, but I only saw our reflection, and hers still on the floor. "Charles, stop it, you're scaring me." "I swear to God, Doc, I saw her. She was standing behind us, and she said something." "What did she say?" He swallowed hard. "Help." The air grew heavy. I looked again at the body, at the stretcher, at the loose strap. There was no explanation. None. Charles was hyperventilating. "I can't take this anymore, Doc. This place is haunted. I saw it." "Calm down, Charles. Breathe. Let's put her back." And that's when I noticed the girl's body. The position. It wasn't how it had fallen. The arms were different. As if someone had moved her. And worse. When I looked at her face again, her eyes were open. I froze. Her eyes were glazed, lifeless but open. And I was absolutely sure I had closed them after the autopsy. I always closed them. It was part of the ritual, the respect. Charles let out a low moan, almost a cry. "She's looking at us, Doc." "It's just rigor mortis, relax," I lied, trying to convince myself too. But I knew it wasn't normal. Rigor mortis didn't make the eyes open on their own. I took a deep breath and approached, my fingers trembling as I touched her eyelids, closing them again. The skin was cold, as it should be, but for a second, I swore I felt a warm breath coming from her mouth. "Let's put her back on the stretcher," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Charles hesitated but came to help. When we lifted the body, something cracked. A bone, maybe. And he almost dropped her arm. "Damn it, Charles, hold her properly." "It's cold, but it feels like she's heavier," he murmured. It was true. Her body felt different, as if something was pulling from within. We managed to put her back on the stretcher, and I fastened the strap tightly, looking around. The silence was wrong. Even the sound of the air conditioning had stopped. That's when the lights flickered, once, twice. On the third flicker, they went out. "Shit!" Charles screamed. I heard him stumble, bumping into something. "Doc, where are you?" "Stay calm," I yelled, but my voice came out hoarse. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat, and then I heard it, a sigh right behind me. It wasn't Charles. He was on the other side of the room. It was something closer, more intentional, as if someone had pressed their lips to my ear and let out a shiver of air. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then, in the dark, a voice, weak, broken, but impossibly clear. "Why didn't you help me?" It was her, the girl. Charles started screaming. "She's here, damn it, she's walking." I heard dragging footsteps, the sound of damp skin scraping on the floor. Something slippery, heavy, moving toward us. The lights came back on with a snap, and there she was, standing, her eyes still closed but her body erect, her fingers twisted like claws. The bloody dress hung wet, and a dark pool formed beneath her. Charles let out a howl and ran out, slamming the door behind him. I couldn't move. She was less than a meter away from me, and I could feel, God, I could feel her smell. Blood, gasoline, and something else. Something rotting from within. And then, slowly, her mouth opened. "You could have saved me." It wasn't a whisper. It was a hoarse, torn voice, as if it had been swallowed by something. I stepped back, tripping over the stretcher. I couldn't do anything. You were already dead when you got here." She shook her head, slow, painful. "I'm not talking about today." And then, as if an invisible thread had been cut, Her body collapsed to the floor, inert. I stayed there paralyzed until the sun began to rise and the other employees arrived. Charles never came back. He quit that same morning. I also thought about leaving, but something made me stay, because that night when I looked at her file again, I discovered something I hadn't noticed before. Her name was Marina, and I knew her. I had attended to her 3 years earlier in the emergency room. She came in with pain and I said it wasn't anything serious. She died the next day, ruptured appendicitis. And now she had come back to remind me, to blame me. And I knew that sooner or later she would appear again. Because the dead don't forget, and they don't forgive. And if you're still with me, it means these stories give you the same chills they give me. Drop a dark morgue in the comments, just so I know who's brave enough to stick around to the end. And don't forget to subscribe, because around here there's always more stories that poke at the fears we try to hide. Hit that like button too. It tells me this kind of content is right up your alley. And if you're still feeling brave, there's a video right here that'll take you even deeper into this world. Click it and come with me.